So brief introduction. During the summer, late spring, I had read something about the whale migration off the Oregon coast was really kind of down this year, that the count had really been down. And I thought, well, you know, that'd be a good subject to talk about here. So, and then this morning, of course, this may not fit into what she'll be talking about today, but you know, I read about there's a young whale that was washed up on the beach at Niskawin and apparently died of hunger. So something is going on out on the ocean right now, and yeah. So, anyway, our speaker today is Taylor Azizeh. She is a Ph.D. fellow in the Ocean Ecology Laboratory at OSU's Marine Mammal Institute. She's located, well, she doesn't live in Newport, but she does work out of the Hatfield Marine Science Center out there. Her dissertation focuses on predator-prey dynamics in large whales. Her research interests include wildlife ecology, bioenergetics, the effects of disturbance, habitat use, and more. She is a graduate from the University of Idaho. Interesting that you'd get into whales from there, but and when she was there, she founded the Idaho chapter of the Women in Science Society. So good for her. She got her master's in vertebrate ecology lab at the Vertebrate Ecology Lab down near Monterey at the Moss Landing Marine Laboratory there. And her master's thesis focused on the foraging ecology of late chick-rearing emperor penguins in the Ross Sea. So she's been down to Antarctica, among other places. Post-graduation, she spent a year in Denmark and Greenland as a Fulbright student. So, and she also spent time, this probably accounts for being at the Ross Sea, she also spent time working with the British Antarctic Survey. So quite a background, so we'll let her talk to us about whales.
Thank you so much for that introduction. You're making me blush, even though they're all true facts. So my name's Taylor. I'm really excited to be here with you today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, the first half of this is going to be kind of generally about marine mammals in Oregon, and we're going to talk a little bit about Oregon as an ecosystem. And then for the second half of the day, I want to talk specifically about gray whale migration along the Oregon coast. But first, I'm going to kind of go through a little bit about what John talked about and just give you the story of how I ended up in this field in the first place. And if anyone can't hear me, please just raise your hand and I'll talk a little bit louder. My keyboard's not working anymore. Thank you. Okay, back to it. We've got like a little bit of my slides here that are cut off on the left, but we should only miss like one letter. And you know already my name's Taylor, not Ayler. So originally I'm from Maple Valley, Washington. So it's a small town. It used to be a small town. It's bigger now in Western Washington near Issaquah, Kent, Auburn. Despite that, I never really thought about the ocean. I didn't go to the ocean. I didn't see whales. I've never thought about it. I just knew that I liked science and I liked animals. And so I ended up going to the University of Idaho. I was just explaining to John, it was far enough away, but not too far away from Western Washington. And while I was there, I originally thought I was going to do environmental law, and then things shifted around 2016, and I thought it might not be the best time to do environmental law. So I pivoted into wildlife research, and I started kind of just trying to figure out what I liked. I worked with ants, I worked with kangaroo rats, I worked with malaria and small captive mice, and just tried a bunch of things to try to figure out what I was really interested in. The main project that I worked on was a project studying insectivorous bats in Ecuador. So I was able to go to Ecuador in the summer of 2018, and we would go into the woods, catch bats. We would catch bats closer to cities and try to determine if there were any molecular differences between the two bats at these different sites. So that was kind of my first experience doing research in a different country with Ecuadorian collaborators and being able to really catch animals and see what they're like and kind of get that hands-on experience that I had really been looking for. We also accidentally caught an owl, which is the picture in the middle. I also spent time in the Mojave, like I said, studying kangaroo rats, so that was an amazing experience. It's pretty intense ecosystem out there, and that's the photo on the right. And when I graduated in 2019, I kind of, wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I know that I liked to travel, and I know that I liked to do science, and I was kind of just applying for everything. And that's how I ended up in the Fulbright program. My keyboard, maybe I'm too far. Okay, we'll see if this keeps pausing every time. So I ended up in the Fulbright program. I applied to Denmark because I thought Denmark would be less competitive, and it was. And so I went to Denmark in 2019, and I was there, and I knew I wanted to do some kind of research, and I wasn't really picky about what. So I went to the academic advisor, and I said, this is my interest. I really just want to publish a paper and work on a project and kind of build my academic network. And so he put me in touch with the Marine Bioacoustics group. So they mainly study echolocation in bats and marine mammals. I am not interested at all in acoustics, but I explained kind of my overarching interests, and they put me in touch with someone named Frederick Christensen who flies drones over whales. So my first experience in marine science was watching 70 hours of drone footage of southern right whales from Argentina and categorizing all their behaviors and just taking a kind of a study of what they do from above. I never intended to study whales. Obviously, I had just come from Idaho, but this was kind of how I ended up in marine science, and I've been here ever since. During this time, obviously 2019 is kind of the precursor to the pandemic. So I moved to Greenland for the second half of my study period in February of 2020, a bad time to move anywhere, much less Greenland. So I got stuck in Greenland from February 2020 to July 2020. They shut the country down. We couldn't go in or, come out. So we were all just stuck there, and it was kind of like a non-pandemic land. We didn't have masks. We just kind of had business as usual because there was no COVID. So it was a really interesting time, a very different experience than most of the people that I had back in the US. Continued my classes, continued doing research, and then tried to fly home in June 2020 and got stuck in Reykjavik, Iceland, and I was not able to return to the United States. So luckily I have an aunt that lives in England, and I was able to call her crying and say, I think I'm homeless. Please take me in. So luckily she's a saint, and I lived with her for a year because I could not return to the US. So when I finally returned in 2021, it was to start my master's program. Let's see. Sorry, folks. Okay, thank you so much. Oops. You want to skip back like 4? Keep going, keep going, keep going. Okay, thank you. No, sorry, one more back. Yeah, perfect. So when I moved back in 2021 is to start my master's at Moss Landing. I had never studied penguins. I don't know many people that do, but this was a funded program, and that was what was important to me. And so I moved to Monterey Bay in 2021 and began my master's project. So I went to Antarctica in 2023, and we captured penguins on ice floes. We were on a big research vessel, and we would get off onto a smaller boat, deploy onto these ice floes, and then basically catch the birds. If you've ever seen Happy Feet, it is exactly like Happy Feet. They have no idea what you are. They're not afraid of you because they've never seen you before. So you are just like a friendly alien. They're amazing birds. They're huge. They're about the size of a 5-year-old. So they're humongous birds. And we would put small devices on their backs. And then those devices would stay on them when they were out at sea, collecting all kinds of really high resolution data. And with that data, I was able to try to determine where and when these birds are trying to catch prey. So that was a great project. That was a great experience. Really blossomed my love for birds. I'm like a huge bird nerd now. So if you want to talk about birds, I'm also happy to do that. I also got to do other work in Monterey. So we did small boat surveys for whales here on the right. This was the first time I saw a lot of whale species, including gray whales, blue whales, humpback whales, all of that. I worked on an elephant seal colony and a bunch of other stuff. So I got to have a bunch of really interesting experiences while I was there. Next slide, please. Okay, perfect. And then I moved to Oregon last fall to start my PhD. So my PhD generally focuses, as John said, on the predator-prey dynamics of large whales. So this means, how are these large whales interacting with their prey? How do things about them change in relation to their changing prey items, like the humpback whale that's stranded because it's starved. I'm interested in why it's starving, what's going on in the ocean that's causing it to starve, that kind of thing. I also got to go out this last August on the Sikuliak, which is a University of Alaska Fairbanks research vessel in the Arctic, and we were doing marine mammal watch. So this photo here on the right is me looking for whales, and that's all I did for about 3 weeks, all day, every day. And that was really great because those are their feeding grounds. So it's really cool to get to see the whales migrate here in Oregon and then also see them in their feeding grounds. And in my mind, I tell myself I saw the same whale, even though I definitely didn't. Okay, go ahead. Okay, so just a quick overview of what I want to talk about today. Thank you for listening to me talk about myself, but now we're going to get into marine mammals and whales. As I mentioned earlier, I want to talk generally about marine mammals in Oregon and the different ecosystems we have here, and then I'm going to stop for questions and to take a short break. And then we're going to specifically talk about gray whales, which are the main migratory species that we get to see from the Oregon coast. And then I'll take more questions at the end. Go ahead, thank you. Okay, so as we know, we're all mammals, and the main traits to being a mammal, these are requirements if you get to call yourself a mammal, is that you breathe air, you have some kind of hair, you produce milk for your babies, well, some of us do, and mammals also give live birth. Now, what makes you a marine mammal is that you depend on the ocean for part of your life history. So there are some animals that you might not expect would be marine mammals, like polar bears. So the main groups of marine mammals are mustelids, which are going to be your sea otters. That also includes a lot of other like terrestrial animals like beavers and weasels and things like that. And then Ursidae, so those are going to be only polar bears. Those are actually a marine mammal because they depend on the ocean for food and for their different migrations and movements. Pinnipeds, so those are going to be walruses, seals, and sea lions. Sirenians, so we don't have any sirenians in Oregon. Those are going to be dugongs and manatees, but if you've ever been to Florida, you've probably seen a manatee. And then the cetaceans, so those are going to be the whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and those are what we're going to talk about in detail today. So just an introduction to whales overall. Their kind of scientific group is called cetaceans, so I might use whales and cetaceans interchangeably. You have toothed whales, so those are going to be your odontocetes. So you have all these different groups here. I think the main toothed whales you would think of would be dolphins or sperm whales. So even though sperm whales are huge, they're not actually like a baleen whale, like something like a humpback or a gray whale. They have teeth, so they're going to be the largest toothed whale. You also have like a narwhal, a beaked whale. There's a lot of other animals that fall into this category. Go ahead. So some defining traits about them, they use echolocation to find their food. So a lot of them have this kind of giant forehead region, their melon, and that's going to be part of their system in order to find food. So they produce clicks and whistles, and those noises go back out into the ocean, and when they reflect back to the animal, it usually hits something in their melon that vibrates and tells them about where their prey items are, the size of their prey items, and how many prey items there are. They have one blowhole, so I think I was surprised when I first started learning about whales that some whales have two and some whales have one. These guys just have one. So if you've ever seen a dolphin at sea and it has the kind of just typical blowhole right off the top of its head there, that's going to be because it's a toothed whale. And again, they have teeth versus baleen, and baleen is that kind of broom-like structure in the jaw of a baleen whale that filter feeds for them. So the other group of cetaceans are the baleen whales or the mysticetes. So these are going to be a lot of the like typical whales that you might think of or that you might see when you're on the ocean or on the coast. So these include gray whales, humpback whales, blue whales. Those are all baleen whales. And these get a lot larger than toothed whales. It's something called giganticism, and it just means they're giant and they eat tiny food. So all these baleen whales have to consume humongous amounts of really, really tiny food like krill or little crustaceans and amphipods. Go ahead. My favorite fact about them is that nobody has any idea how they find food. It seems like a really, really basic thing that we should know, but because they don't have the ability to echolocate, we kind of don't know how they find food. It could be something like a chemical sensor, it could be smell, it could be a lot of things, but nobody's entirely sure. They also have two blowholes rather than one, so even though they're right next to each other on their head, they're two separate blowholes. And their blowholes are separate from their mouth, so unlike us where we can't breathe and eat at the same time, or if we plug our nose to breathe through our mouth, their systems are completely separate, so they're able to feed and hold their breath without having that kind of interchange happen. So if you ever smell whale breath on the ocean, their blow is like really stinky. It's not actually from their mouth, it's just from their blowhole. And again, they have those big baleen plates that are going to help them filter feed. So they literally look like a big broom, and they have these plates that are all stacked back to back, and then they take water in through their mouth. They push the water out through the baleen, and then they take their tongue and scrape all of the little critters off of their baleen. And despite how big some of these animals get, their throat is like very small. So like when you think about, I think there's a story in the Bible where someone gets swallowed by a whale. That doesn't happen because their throats are so small that you would not be able to get into their stomach. That being said, I would not want to be in the water with a baleen whale because they're humongous. Go ahead. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the marine environment in Oregon in general. So we have a massive coastline, and one of my favorite things about Oregon is that a lot of the coastline is public. So there's a lot of public land in Oregon, and a lot of the coastline is, it's public. Nobody owns it, so you're allowed to recreate on it and to go on it. It makes Oregon a really important place for different kind of recreational activities and commercial activities. So people in Oregon boat, surf, they view wildlife, they fish, they crab. There's a lot of ecotourism that happens here. So there's a lot of people that come to Oregon specifically to whale watch or specifically to look at marine animals. And then there's also this really important commercial fish harvest in Oregon. Here on the right, I just wanted to there's like a lot happening in this picture, but we're just going to kind of walk through it. It just shows the connection between those terrestrial or intertidal systems and the open ocean. So everything in the ocean is really connected, and things that happen in the intertidal influence, like benthic organisms, and then in turn, those benthic organisms influence the whales or vice versa. And so it's this really amazing kind of feedback loop between everything in the ocean, and everything contributes to each other, which makes it a sensitive ecosystem, but also a really incredible, very interconnected ecosystem. So some of the different marine environments that we have in Oregon, I think there's some that you might not expect. So we have really, really important estuaries in Oregon, and those are the kind of like mix of freshwater and saltwater systems that are more terrestrial. But what makes them estuaries is that they have this surface connection to the ocean. So when the tides come in and come out, water is coming in and out of the estuaries and affecting all the different processes and organisms that live there. Oregon has 22 main estuaries and a bunch of smaller ones. So it's a massive amount of estuaries in our state that is not, humongously big. We have a lot of really important estuaries. And these are often really important places for juvenile animals like fish and different benthic organisms and birds. It's a really important like nursery area for a lot of these young species. We also have the Rocky Intertidal. So if you've ever gone tide pooling, you have been a participant in the Rocky Intertidal. Oregon has incredible tide pooling. It has this beautiful rocky kind of part of a lot of its coast. Everything beyond the reach of the ocean is considered terrestrial. So if it can't be touched by the water, it's no longer part of the rocky intertidal, and that's how you can kind of differentiate between the two. I thought it was really interesting. Of that 300 something miles of coastline, 150 linear miles of rocky shore habitat exists. So it's a huge, huge, huge amount of habitat for these animals that live in the rocky intertidal. And it's also important microhabitats for animals. So there are some animals that live in the intertidal almost their whole life. The intertidal is very, I don't know how to describe it. It's very segmented. So like there's some animals that can't go past a certain point because they'll dry out and die. There's some that will glue onto a rock and stay there forever. There's all these different tolerance thresholds for these animals that live here. And so it's this really dynamic, really interesting ecosystem. We also have the dunes. The dunes are so special to Oregon. Like I said, I worked in California for a long time, and I think it's really cool to come to Oregon and get to kind of learn about the dunes and experience what it's like to have a marine environment with dunes. So we actually have the largest expanse of coastal sand dunes in North America. So that makes Oregon really special, and that makes this ecosystem very special. The dunes are over 100,000 years old, so they are super, super old. And they're mainly formed by the wind blowing sand around. But the dunes are kind of threatened because they have these native plant species that are really important to the stability of the dunes. And in turn, the dunes are very important habitat for some seabirds and shorebirds like the plovers. So that makes it kind of this, again, very tentative ecosystem that needs to be protected with these native plant restoration efforts. Oregon also has a lot of marine protected areas and marine reserves. So there are 5 main reserves that are here on the right. So Cape Falcon, Cascade Head, Otter Rock, Cape Perpetua, and I can't even read that one on the bottom. Another one in the south. There's also 9 MPAs. So an MPA is a marine protected area, and the reserves and the marine protected areas are very important because they're no-take areas. And so fishing is really restricted there. And that makes it really important for these migratory species like the whales that we're going to talk about earlier, in addition to all of the species that aren't being, fished in those areas. And additionally, there's no development in those areas, which makes them these really protected ecosystems for these animals that rely on them in order to migrate. Lastly, kind of moving out from the intertidal, out from the dunes, you have the continental shelf and the open water. So these systems are really heavily influenced by oceanographic processes like the California current system, and also seasonal upwelling. So upwelling is a really important process because it brings a lot of productivity and prey items to these animals. So usually surface winds will drive water down really deep, and it will get cold and pick up a lot of nutrients and organisms. And as that cold water cycles back up to the surface, that's what those animals are here to feed on. So it's this really important kind of churning that happens in the ocean that makes these ecosystems especially important. Go ahead. I want to touch a little bit on sea otters, because we do have these groups, all 4 of these groups here in Oregon. We have the pinnipeds, the seals and sea lions, we have toothed and baleen whales, and we also kind of have sea otters. And I had to talk about them because they're a lot of people's favorite marine animal, and so it's definitely worth mentioning, and they're, ridiculously cute. So we used to have sea otters in Oregon, and then they were hunted for their fur, basically to extinction in this area. There was an unsuccessful reintroduction effort, I think in the 70s or the 80s. So they tried to bring otters back and it failed. That being said, otters are very occasionally seen in Oregon, and there are a lot of them in Washington and California. So we're kind of no otter land, sandwiched between otter lands. So I think otters will come back eventually, and I know there is talk about trying to reintroduce them again now that we have more technology and more knowledge. But yeah, for a lot of reasons, that's probably not going to happen in Oregon anytime soon. So as we kind of get into these different groups of marine mammals, I want to talk about the difference between a seal and a sea lion. I think it's really easy to see any kind of pinniped on the ocean and be like, that's a seal. No. They are very different. And once you know the difference, I think it's really hard to get it wrong. So we'll just really quickly go through them. So seals do not have external ears. They don't have flappies, as this photo calls them. They don't have ear flappies at all. So if you see an animal in the water has no ear flaps, you can kind of automatically know that's a seal, even if you don't see many other things about it. On the other hand, a sea lion does have those external ear flaps, so they're very easy to tell apart in that way. Seals also move very differently than sea lions. So sea lions have these really powerful front flippers, and I'm sure if you've ever been on any beach ever, you've seen the sea lions walking on their front paws. Seals don't do that. So seals, the actual scientific word is galump. So they kind of have this galumphing movement where they kind of go along the beach. So they are not able to do that kind of walking that the sea lions do on their front flippers. Instead, they have this really interesting kind of fish movement from side to side. So when they swim in the water, they use their back flippers to undulate just like a fish from side to side, whereas sea lions are propulsive swimmers. So they use their front paws to push themselves in the water to swim. Obviously, the coloration is very different, especially here in Oregon where we don't have that many species of pinnipeds. Anything spotty is going to be a seal, and anything brown typically is going to be a sea lion. The exception to that are elephant seals, but we'll talk about them later, and they're pretty difficult to mistake anyway. You can see on the right here, like just how different the skeletons are. So like the upper photo is a seal, and then the bottom photo there is a sea lion, and I mean, they're very morphologically different. So the sea lions have those really powerful front legs, and the seals don't. And the seals galump. Go ahead, next slide. Thank you. So specifically, the pinnipeds that you might see in Oregon, one of them is going to be a Pacific harbor seal. These, I like to think of seals as cats and sea lions as dogs. So seals are a bit shyer. They're a lot less vocal than sea lions. You might not get more than one or two good looks at them if you're on the water. But if they're hauled out like this on the beach, you can usually, like, as long as you don't scare them away, you can get a good look at them for a while. They do this behavior called banana-ing. Again, that's a scientific word, where they put their head up and put their back flippers up and kind of just sit like that. They are very common, so I think it's very likely that you could see one of them, and you can just remember, like, no ear flappies, spotty, light gray, and it's easy to remember the difference. This is an elephant seal, also pretty unmistakable for anything else. This is a male elephant seal. So the males have these proboscises. It's the same thing you would call like an elephant's trunk, sorry. So it's a proboscis. It's something used for sexual selection. So the males will fight and hit each other in the nose, and it's like this ridiculous courtship ritual. I worked on an elephant seal colony in Santa Cruz, and honestly, the males, they're humongous, but the females are way scarier. So the males are kind of like, they're big, but they're just kind of like goofy and shy, but the females are super mean, and they are protective over the other females and over the babies. And so I was never afraid of the males, even though they're just gigantic. I was always afraid of the females. So you won't see these guys as commonly in Oregon, but we do have them, and you're likely to see them in the water if you do see them at all. The females look very similar to this, just without that giant nose. So they have these really characteristic kind of big eyes and kind of like a little bear face. They have these like big cheeks with whiskers on them. And again, no ear flappies. So that's also a great way to know that you're seeing a seal and not a sea lion. So alternatively, moving away from the seals, we have stellar sea lions in Oregon. So the males are absolutely huge, and they practice something called harem breeding. So this male is like, these are my girls, and they're all mine. And so he's not sharing any of those girls unless another male comes along and fights him for them. So elephant seals also practice this harem breeding, where they have one male with a bunch of females, and they protect all the girls and try to claim everybody. These guys are fairly common in Oregon, so you could expect to see them. I'm not sure. I don't know if I saw a female stellar sea lion and a California sea lion, if I would know the difference right off the bat. So as long as you know it's a sea lion, I feel like that's all you need. And then most commonly, you're going to see the California sea lion. So these are the ones that, if you've ever been to Newport, they're all on the dock there. They're super easy to see. They are so loud and smelly, and they're the dogs of the pinnipeds for sure. But they're pretty amazing animals, and they're only here for part of the year. So if you can see them, you definitely should. Okay, moving into the cetaceans. So these are going to be the different kinds of whales you can see in Oregon. I like to think of whales and dolphins as like squares and rectangles, right? Where it's like one is the other, but the other's not always the other. I can't remember what it is. It's like a square, a rectangle is always a square, but a square is never a rectangle or something. So like all dolphins are whales, but not all whales are dolphins. So this is a whale, but it's also a porpoise. So harbor porpoises are really tiny. They're probably only about this big, maybe a couple feet long. They're relatively common, but they're very shy. So if anything, you could get like one good look at them on a boat, but you're not going to be like seeing them flip out of the water and do backflips and show off like dolphins do. My favorite fact about porpoises is they have spatulate teeth. So their teeth are shaped like spades, and this is just part of their morphology. It's how they eat fish, but they have these really creepy little like weird shaped teeth that I really like. Yeah, they're odontocetes, so they have that one blowhole on the back, and these guys mainly eat fish. We have the iconic killer whale. So there are a bunch of killer whales are super complicated, and they are like the alpha of the ocean, and they're amazing. But we have the three kind of main types of killer whales. So there's resident killer whales, like the ones in Washington that live in the Puget Sound. You have offshore killer whales, which you pretty much will never see near shore. And then you have transient killer whales, which kind of go all over the place and are unpredictable and will come in and then go out, and they're just kind of mixing it up. A lot of killer whales are very picky eaters. So for instance, the residents in Washington only eat one type of salmon, even though they could eat plenty of other food. And so a lot of them starve. And no one's really sure why. They don't just eat other food, because they can eat pretty much anything. But they're very picky. Killer whales are terrifying, so they often will kill great white sharks and just eat the liver. They are like, I would never want to be in the water with a killer whale ever. Even though they don't attack humans, they mainly attack other animals, but they're just too smart for me. We do see them in Oregon, so we see them from Newport sometimes, just kind of randomly come into the bay, and then they'll leave and they don't stick around very long. But we don't have any of those resident killer whales that they do up in Washington, for example. Go ahead. Another animal that you would be pretty likely to see in Oregon is a Pacific white-sided dolphin. So these guys will hang out in giant pods, and they're like a classic dolphin. Like, they love to show off. They love to do tricks. They love to bow ride, which is when you're in a boat and they're in the wake in the front of the boat and they're just going along with you. They're really charismatic and cute, and yeah, they're just beautiful. They're really easy to tell the difference between something like this and some of the other dolphins we're talking about, because they have this really distinct coloring. So they have the counter shading, where the upper part of them is dark and then the under part of them is light. And that's so fish, when they're under them, look up and think they're seeing the sky, but it's actually just the dolphin's belly. And then alternatively, like a predator up above them would look down, and the top of them would blend into the darker water in the bottom. So a lot of fish have this, and these guys have it as well. We have the, also iconic bottlenose dolphin. So bottlenose are actually pretty near shore. So if you're ever off of the shore in Oregon, you're most likely to see them when you're closer to the shoreline. Again, these guys are, super playful, super charismatic, and love to show off for people and get attention. And then we have my favorite, I think it's an underrated cetacean. It's called a Dahl's porpoise. So this really tiny little porpoise, but my favorite thing about them is when they surface, they spray water behind them, and they call it a rooster tail. And so when you're at sea and you're seeing all these rooster tails come out of the water, you know that you're seeing Dahls, even if you can't see the actual animal. And they're really fast and really curious, and I just think they're a really unique looking little porpoise. And I love their little rooster tail when they spray water. Go ahead. And then the last toothed whale, I think these are unique because you probably wouldn't put this in the same category as something like a porpoise. So sperm whales are actually a toothed whale. They only have teeth in their bottom jaw, and for some reason, the only prey that they eat is giant squid. So they go super, super deep in the ocean and they fight giant squid. They're just the weirdest whale, and that makes me love them a lot because this whole humongous forehead region is full of something called spermaceti. So it's this like thick, viscous liquid that helps them echolocate. So when they send out echolocation signals and it comes back, it hits their giant, weird, bulbous forehead full of liquid and moves all the liquid around and helps them echolocate. So they just have this like ridiculously disproportionate body and head that just makes me laugh every time I look at them. And they also sleep vertically. So you might have seen photos of like a bunch of them like completely straight up and down, just bobbing in the water. Yeah, they're just super weird. When I was in Italy, I lived on a research sailboat for about a month studying sperm whales, and I stayed in the bottom of the boat with big headphones on, and we were trying to locate them. So we would listen for their echolocation and then move the boat and see if it got louder or softer and try to kind of triangulate to them. But their echolocation just sounds like this. It's this really constant, like snap is exactly what it sounds like. And so they're just constantly clicking to forage. And then when they find something, they do something called a coda. So a coda is a unique 4-note expression that differs among all the different sperm whale populations in the world. So a coda from a whale in the Mediterranean is going to sound different than from a coda than a whale in Alaska. So for instance, the sperm whales here would make this coda that was like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's like a code word that they all do to each other. And so when you're listening to sperm whales all over the world, if they're migrating or something, you know which populations they're from because they have like a secret password. So they have this really, really amazing kind of social structure and communication system that we just don't even like come close to fully understanding at all. Okay, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the baleen whales, the mysticetes. So humpback whales, I think, are one of the most kind of recognizable and iconic baleen whales. My favorite fact about them is their genus, their scientific genus means big winged. So they have these super long pectoral fins there. They're kind of arms, and they have the longest pectoral fin to body ratio of any animal in the animal kingdom. So like their arms are really long, and they make them really maneuverable underwater and really like can make them turn easier, and it makes it easier for them to forage because they have pretty complicated foraging patterns. So in Alaska, these guys will blow bubble nets where they'll start really low and blow like a funnel of bubbles up to the surface and basically make all the fish go up together, and then they'll come from beneath and scoop them up. And so they have this really incredible, all these incredible strategies to try to feed themselves. And so they need to be able to move around quickly and to, you know, kind of angle themselves quickly. And yeah, I just think they're really charismatic and they have a lot of personality. We used to see a lot of them in Monterey that would come back year after year. There's a citizen science project that runs everywhere, I guess, called Happy Whale. So if you ever get a good photo of the underside of a whale's tail or their fluke or their dorsal fin, you can submit that to Happy Whale. And if your whale has been seen before, they'll send you an email and say, hey, this is your whale, Kevin, and he was first seen in Mexico in 2009, and it'll give you like the life history of this animal. And so we would get the same humpback whales into Monterey all the time, and people would name them crazy stuff. There was one called Fluke Skywalker. That was my favorite that we would see every year. So if you ever, anywhere in the world, are getting good photos of whales, try and submit them to Happy Whale and see if it's free. Like just see if your whale has been seen before and learn any information you can about that animal. So we also get minke whales occasionally in Oregon. These guys are a little bit smaller than humpback whales. Humpback whales are around 50 feet, so they're kind of a medium-sized whale. And minke whales are around the same size. They're pretty tricky to see. I don't know for sure that I've ever seen a minke whale. Oftentimes when you see a whale at the surface, you just see the dorsal fin on the back, so it can be kind of tricky if you aren't like really good on your whale ID. But if you do get to see more of this guy, he has really, really distinct patterning there with these kind of stripes and a really distinct kind of short, stubby head that makes them easier to ID. Then, of course, the blue whale. The blue whale is the biggest animal that has ever existed on the planet. They're about 100 feet in length, so twice as big as a humpback whale or a minke whale or a gray whale. I was on a small boat once doing surveys, and a blue whale came up right next to our boat, and I thought I would think it was cool, but it was so scary. They are so big. Your brain is just saying, like, you should get away from that thing. Like, that thing is really big. So it was really terrifying to see in person. But they're gentle giants. All they eat is krill. They are just like such an incredible animal because they eat one of the tiniest little organisms on the planet, and they have to eat so much of it in order to sustain themselves and to stay giant. But yeah, we do see blue whales occasionally off of Oregon. And then specifically, we're going to talk a lot about the gray whale today. So as everyone knows, some of you might even have them on your license plate. The gray whale is very famous in Oregon. Part of that is because they're so easily spotted off of the Oregon coast. So especially in this time of year, in their two kind of migration periods, they're very easy to see from the Oregon coast. So if you go and we spend an hour, you can probably see a gray whale off the Oregon coast. And they're just really kind of weird and special. And I think because they're so often seen in Oregon, I think that's made them kind of this beloved animal in the state, which is really cool for me because I get to study them. So I love getting to study an animal that kind of everyone knows and likes and cares about because they're such a big part of the state's ecotourism and such a big part of the like coastal community. How much time do I have? Yeah, actually go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm ready to take some questions, and it was kind of a lot of information for you, but we're gonna, like I said, focus on gray whales for the last half of this talk.
Excuse me.
Hi, this is Brenda. This is a stupid question, but is a whale shark either a whale or a shark, or is it just a fish?
That's not a stupid question. They named it bad. It's a fish. Yeah.
Terrific. Okay, let me stand up. I'm Lee here back here at the Giants of the Gallery. Anyway, plastic in the ocean is considered a big environmental hazard. Could you tell us how it affects our Oregon coast and the life and death of the whales, and what we could do as human beings to coalesce and move in the opposite direction to dissipate the problem?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I don't talk about this in length, but so some of the gray whales have been found to have starved to death, similar to the humpback whale that was recently found on the beach here. And when they do what's called a necropsy, which is basically just an animal autopsy, they'll often find a lot of plastic or garbage or debris in their stomachs because they can't sort it all out. You know, they're just kind of taking in stuff and then seeing what happens. It's worse specifically for gray whales because they're benthic feeders, which I'll talk about in a second, but it's easier to get plastic from the seafloor than it is to get it in the water column. You know, as for direct action, I think beach cleanups are awesome. I think like being able to help out with like whatever small scale conservation stuff you can is an easier like ask than to, you know, stop making any garbage. I think it's like, that's not reasonable, but something like a beach cleanup or something where you can just help out, I think is a great way to keep at least the trash from going directly into the water right there. You know what I mean? But it's a great question.
Hi, I'm Deanna. We've been lucky to see lots of gray whales, and a couple of times we've seen killer whales. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering, is there a best time to see killer whales on the Oregon coast?
That's tricky. I feel like that's the $1 million question. I worked on a whale watch boat for like 3 years in Monterey, and every day people would be like, we're going to see killer whales today, right? Or we're going to see a blue whale. And I'd be like, I've seen them 3 times in 3 years. Best time is tricky, right? Because we don't have a resident population. So they often will come, you know, when the gray whales are here because they want to eat the babies. So it's not like a day or time you can ever go and see them, but I think if you're ever watching gray whales and you see a lot of them, there's like a decent chance you might also see some killer whales. There's also like groups on Facebook that will post when there's killer whales, like for instance in the bay in Newport, and they will often stick around for a little bit. So there's groups where you can join where they'll be like, oh, there's killer whales, everybody come look at them. But otherwise they're like way too smart for me to try to predict what they're gonna do.
I'm Brad. You mentioned with the sperm whale for the echolocators that the sperm whale had 4 notes. Sperm whale had 4 notes, and you could tell what part of the ocean the sperm whale was from because one of those notes would be a D flat or a C.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Do all echolocators also have 4 notes, or does the number of notes vary by species? And
yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
a great question. Sperm whales are
Yeah.
super weird. They're so cool.
Oh, okay.
A lot of echolocators, dolphins and stuff, they don't have this kind of steady rhythm that the sperm whales do. Like the sperm whales really, it's synchronous, and they just keep going until they echolocate something. And then a coda is like a 4-note grouping of sounds, and so like the ones in Italy were like do 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 do, and then but other times it'll be like do 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 do. Like it's just some kind of random mixture of those 4 notes. Other echolocators often use whistles too, so like everyone's heard like a dolphin whistle. So there's all these different noises that they can make. But as far as I know, sperm whales are the only ones that have this unique kind of calling card between all these different populations. And yeah, it's just so cool. The first time I heard it, I was like, hey, what are they doing? What are they doing? Because I was freaking out. I'd been listening to them for weeks, and I'd never heard that before. And so it's really interesting the way that they do that. Yeah, great question.
Hi, I'm Al. What sort of limitations or bans are there on catching whales, either Oregon or the West Coast?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, whaling killed a lot of whales all over the world, and it was banned. There was a moratorium put on whaling by the International Whaling Commission in the 20th century, I believe. And now whales will be taken occasionally, typically by native populations, indigenous people, and those take limits are set by the government. So for instance, I work with the Macaw tribe, and we're there in Washington because they have a bunch of gray whales right there off the peninsula, and they're allowed to take, I think, like 1 or 2 a year. I mean, it's a really, really small number. But in other countries like Iceland or Japan, I know that they hunt whales a little bit more extensively. I can't speak to the other countries, but I know that tribes, on the West Coast here, are allowed to take a certain number of whales depending on the government restrictions, and those are usually created in response to kind of research like I do that are saying like, how many whales are there? What are they eating? Are they doing okay? But the way I think of it is like whales are often killed by ships and plastic, and for a lot of worse reasons than tribes being allowed to practice subsistence hunting. So yeah, that's how it's decided how many whales are taken. Thank you for your question.
Hi, I'm George. Curious about noise, man-made noise. Apparently it can be very disruptive.
Mm-hmm.
Are we making any progress there, and really how harmful is that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one way that we study that is through something called passive acoustic monitoring. So it's literally like they just put big megaphones or microphones out in the ocean that are there year round. And so they're able to then every year or so go back and collect those moorings and listen and see how much noise there is in those areas over the full course of a year. So often in areas like marine protected areas or these places that have these restrictions put on them, like you're not allowed to bring like a 2,000 person cruise ship in or something that's really disruptive to animals. So that's the great thing about MPAs, is that they're really designed to provide those animals a respite from a lot of different disturbances, including acoustic disturbances. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Hi, I'm Neil. So I know that you can almost always see whales off of Yaquina Head Lighthouse and Depot Bay, and I just wondered if you can recommend any other good whaling locations, spots to see whales.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about that in the next 45 minutes. I have a
Getting
map.
ahead. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I have a full map, so you'll be ready to go.
Okay.
Any other questions?
All right, I guess we're ready for a break then.
Thank you, guys. Okay. I think I'm still going to need slide assistance. Okay, great. I'm going to hopefully answer a lot of the questions that some people had as we start to talk specifically about gray whales in Oregon. So again, one of my favorite things about getting to move to Oregon and getting to study gray whales here is how much everyone also loves gray whales. Penguins were great, but it's not necessarily what we call applied science. So when I'm here and I get to work on gray whales, I feel like I can make a difference in state management and in like conservation of the whales. And with penguins, it's hard because no one manages Antarctica. So this for me is a really exciting place to be and to get to work in Oregon with gray whales. So I want to talk a little bit about baleen whale migration in general, and then we're going to specifically talk about Whale Watch Week, which is a big deal in Oregon, and I'm really excited to participate this year. But generally, baleen whale migration happens in reverse to our seasons. So in our winter, the whales go somewhere warm. So they are going to go down to Baja, Mexico and California to reproduce. And in our summer, they're going to go up to the Arctic to try to get as fat as they possibly can before they have to make this extreme migration back all the way down to Mexico. Go ahead. So part of that in Oregon are these whale watch weeks where people gather to help with citizen science. So all the science that we do, we still are never going to outnumber the public. And so citizen science is a super important and impactful way that the public can help provide actual data to scientists to help us with our work. So in Oregon, there are a bunch of sites up all along the coast where volunteers gather, and these people in the blue vests are trained to lead these watches. And people gather in these locations and just count whales. And so during the southbound migration and the northbound migration, it's really important to get an accurate count because, as you can imagine, it's very hard to accurately estimate how many whales are out there at any given time. You can only see them when they're at the surface. They go all over the place, and sometimes they just won't come anywhere near people to be seen. So these whale watch weeks really help us understand how many whales might actually be in the water. So the southbound migration whale watch week is December 27th to the 31st. This is not a paid advertisement, by the way. I don't work with Oregon Whale Watch Week, but I just think it's a really cool opportunity. And then the northbound migration is between the 21st of March and the 29th. And so you can Google it, but I think it's like any of these days, you can just kind of show up and help everybody count whales. During the southbound migration in December, they can get up to 30 whales an hour. So that's a huge, huge amount of animals because, as we'll discuss, gray whales do not live in pods. They're not like killer whales. So these are just all separate animals migrating at the same time in the same area in Oregon. Yeah, go ahead, next slide. So first I want to talk a little bit about this picture. This is not AI. The gray whales in Baja are really friendly, like really weirdly friendly. They shouldn't be this friendly probably, but you can take trips to go and pet the gray whales. It's crazy. Like the moms will push their calves up to the boat, like go get your ear scratched. It's really, really quite bizarre. But they have all these different trips that go. I know there's a trip that runs through my program, the Marine Mammal Institute, that takes people down to go pet whales. But they're very friendly when they're on their breeding grounds. These are like very sheltered, warm water, shallow lagoons where the moms and the babies are just kind of hanging out, trying to get fat before they migrate back north. Now, gray whales in general are a medium-sized whale, so they're about 50 feet long and 80,000 pounds, so, you know, just a teensy little thing. In general, female baleen whales are larger than males. They have this added cost of lactation, which is very expensive for whales because whale fat is very, very high. Whale milk is very, very high in fat. So the females often have this kind of extra energetic stress because it's harder to be a female. Sorry, guys. Yeah, but you also can't really tell the difference between a male and a female. Like if you're just out on the coast in Newport, let's say, looking at whales, you can't look and tell who's a male and who's a female. They are relatively sexually monomorphic, which means males and females don't look that different. Not like a lion, for instance, where you can easily tell who's who. Whales are much harder to tell apart. The only real way you can tell is if a female is accompanied by a calf, then you know that that's a female with a calf, but otherwise it's pretty difficult to tell. Go ahead. So gray whales, as I discussed earlier, kind of have this, they don't have a dorsal fin, so they don't have that really distinct fin on their back that like a humpback whale does or a blue whale. They have these knuckles instead that go kind of from the base of their spine right along what's called their peduncle, which is like where the body narrows and then widens out to the tail. That's their peduncle, that like big thingy you could grab onto it. And they have knuckles there. They're kind of this really beautiful dark gray color. So when the babies are born, they're completely dark gray. And then as they age, they get kind of mottled and gray and white. They have a lot of different little critters that live on them. Whales are like great real estate for something like a barnacle. So this whale here on the right, you can see has different barnacles and whale lice here on the upper part of its rostrum or its nose. And their blow is about 15 feet high, which sounds really high, but a blue whale's blow is like 30 feet high. So their blow or their spout, gray whale specifically, looks kind of bushy. So because it's shorter, it looks kind of just like a big poof, whereas something like a blue whale will be completely straight up in the air. So one way you can try to look for different species of whales is by the shape of their blow when you're on the water. Next slide. Okay, this is the coolest thing about the gray whales. So they feed in the dirt. They don't feed like normal baleen whales. They swim down, they open up their jaw and start scooping dirt, turn on their right side and paddle along and just scoop dirt in their mouth. And then they turn and go on their belly up and come back to the surface. And why do they do this? We don't know. They're weird. But they have this crazy feeding technique where they're scooping mud. And again, with baleen whales, they're pushing all that mud and water out through their baleen and then taking their tongue and scraping off all of the little organisms. And as I mentioned, this is part of why they might be more susceptible to something like plastic pollution, because who knows what's in the dirt? They don't even know what's in the dirt. So they're kind of just winging it, trying to see what's in there and if there's anything edible for them. And while I'm sure they can kind of sort things out and like spit out a tire or something if they get it, they can't get a lot of those kind of smaller microplastics. They can't differentiate between the prey and the plastic. And so there's two distinct groups we're going to talk about today. Someone mentioned to me earlier that they were told there is not like a resident pod of gray whales in Oregon, but there kind of is. So I study the eastern North Pacific gray whales. So in the Pacific Ocean on the west side with Russia, you have a very small group of gray whales that live there, and they're called the western North Pacific gray whales. And then obviously on the east, you have the eastern North Pacific gray whales, or the ENP gray whales. This is a much, 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 much larger group. And these are the whales that we're going to see off of the Oregon coast typically. That being said, there is a small group of about 200 whales called the Pacific Coast Feeding Group, the PCFG whales, and these are 200 gray whales that do not migrate. They hang out around Oregon all year round. They kind of move around. They don't just hang out in one bay or one area, but they don't migrate the way that the ENP gray whales do. So we're going to talk in depth about these two different groups, and yeah, we can We don't know why the PCFGs stay, but they're a very interesting subpopulation. So again, those PCFG whales do not migrate. So this figure here, the green outline is a PCFG whale, and the yellow outline is one of those ENP gray whales. So the whales that do not migrate are smaller than the whales that do, like generally lengthwise, widthwise, and their tails are smaller. They're just generally kind of shrunken versions of those ENP gray whales. I think that that is likely because they're not migrating to those really productive Arctic feeding grounds, so they're not able to get big and humongous and fat like the ENP gray whales. They're choosing to stay here, so they're choosing to feed benthic in Oregon, but also try to feed in nearshore habitats and try to eat pelagic food as well. And I think over time that just kind of shrinks you down. That being said, when you're on a boat on the water, even with a drone, you wouldn't have this comparison. You would just be watching a whale. You wouldn't know until after the fact if it's smaller or larger. So the way they differentiate these guys, the main group that studies them is called the Geospatial Ecology of Marine Megafauna. Big mouthful. We're going to call it the GEM Lab. The GEM Lab is a group at the Marine Mammal Institute where I work that has been studying the PCFG whales for over a decade. So they have this really long-term photo ID catalog, and they know all of these whales on site. They'll be like, oh yeah, we saw banana today. They know all of them. They don't even need the catalog. It's amazing. They've been seeing these whales every year for a decade, and they see when one has a calf, and then they know the calf, and they'll watch the calf grow up and eventually have other calves. And so they have this these family histories and these trees and just this really long-term monitoring of this group, which is really interesting. You can also use genetics to differentiate them between those ENP gray whales. Go ahead. So the ENPs, that's the group that I mainly work with. These are the ones that you're going to likely see in the Whale Watch Week kind of migration watch efforts because they go past Oregon twice a year on this super long migration that we're going to talk about in detail. And again, they're larger than those PCFG whales. Okay, so there's a lot going on in this figure, but I couldn't think of a better way to explain this besides just walking through it slowly. If you could go to the next slide. First, I want to talk about this abundance and calf count graph. So as I mentioned, these gray whales have had these massive die-offs. So they were hunted almost to extinction in whaling, and then they had this really historic population recovery where once they stopped being killed for oil, their population skyrocketed, and they were doing amazing, and everyone was like, oh my gosh, they came back, they did it, conservation works. And then in 1999, a bunch of them all just died, and there were no calves, and everyone was really confused. And because their populations were high, people thought they were suffering from something called a density-dependent effect, which just means there's too many whales, and they can't all get enough food to live. So because of competition is why they all died off. Natural selection, there's too many. The best foragers get the food, the worst foragers die. That was the idea. That UME, the unusual mortality event, only lasted about a year, and then everything kind of came back. The numbers started coming back. There were more calves. The bottom graph is the calf, so you can see a lot more are being born. And then this line up on the top graph is the number of gray whales overall. So the numbers are back, the calves are back, everything is good. And then in 2019, those numbers started really dropping off again. So they declared, NOAA, the government, declared another UME. They said, okay, a bunch of these whales are dying. We don't know why. This is kind of like a conservation emergency. They actually tried to declare the UME closed in 2022, but recently they reopened it because the current gray whale numbers are the lowest they have been since the 1970s, since monitoring began. So there's only about 13,000 animals right now. There's also really low calf counts. So all of these things kind of combine to be what is determined to be a UME, which is unusual mortality. They're dying, we don't know why. Research that was done by my advisor suggests that instead of this kind of competition-based mortality, it's actually because they just don't get enough food. So he built a model that showed that when prey abundance in the Arctic is low, all the gray whales start dying and there's no calves. So it's very clearly correlated that with like low prey abundance and low prey quality in the Arctic, all the gray whales start dying. I promise this won't be depressing the whole time. Go ahead to the next slide. Part of this is because they make one of the longest migrations of any mammal. So it is no small feat to go from the Arctic to, nearly the equator. It's an almost 12,000 mile trip. So it's a massive amount of distance that they go. So it's a huge amount of energetic stress. So I'm trying to read this. So in May and November, that's kind of the time when these whales are going to be up. Like I said, the summer-ish time is when they're up in those Arctic feeding grounds, those cold water feeding grounds, trying to get as fat as possible. So they're at the very top of the map here. Then they're going to start moving south from November to February and start their migration all the way back down to Baja. These guys only go about 2.5 miles offshore throughout this whole migration. So they are hugging the coastline all the way down to Baja, which is great for scientists because then we can see them the whole way and people can see them and help us count them. So February, January, they arrive in Mexico and they shelter in these shallow, warm breeding grounds and they reproduce or they give birth to their calves. And from the time they leave the feeding grounds, they're fasting. So they might have a little bit of supplemental feeding after they leave, but they basically eat for a few months and then don't eat the rest of the year. So it's this very intense, energetically stressful way to live, but this is what they do. So in the breeding grounds around February, they start their migration back north, and they do this every year, all year. They're either moving or hanging out for a little bit, or they're on the move again. So this is part of why, if there's not enough food, they die, because they have this really, really expensive migration, and they have this kind of one shot to fill up and to get as fat as they need to be before they migrate again. So luckily, we're here in the United States, we're here in Oregon, we get to see these guys on both ways when they're migrating. Okay, thank you. So how do they find their way when they migrate? A lot of animals practice something called site fidelity or maternal fidelity. So this is when you just know where to go, and we don't really know how they know this. But for instance, like baby sea turtles are born on a beach and they leave the beach, and when they're ready to reproduce years later, they just know how to get back to the beach, even though they've never been there before, besides being born. So a lot of these animals have these ways of finding their way back to places that we don't fully understand. So the Arctic is a big place, and I'm guessing that a lot of these whales are either shown by their mom of like, hey, this is a really good spot to feed, and then they know to come back there, or they kind of follow each other. I think it's not really fully understood kind of how they know exactly where to go. But they also hug the coastline, so it's kind of hard to get lost when you have, the continent to follow as you're going. Along their migration, they also experience hazards. So that being that close to shore, they experience a lot of ship traffic. They don't have a lot of natural predators, but a killer whale is like the natural predator of everything. So this is a picture of a killer whale attacking a gray whale calf. Everyone's got to eat. So in Monterey, when I lived there and worked on the whale watch boat, there was like a season of the year we were excited about, because if there was killer whale, gray whale calves, we knew there would probably be killer whales too. And so it was an interesting time to get to watch these kind of interactions between the animals. So although killer whales do predate on gray whale calves, it's a lot of work for them. And so it's definitely not their main prey item. Killer whales kind of either eat fish or marine mammals. They're kind of split into those two camps. So like some killer whales will eat seals in Antarctica, but they won't go and eat salmon, for instance. So they kind of have these distinct feeding groups that they're a part of. And then again, there's that really high energetic cost of fasting. So it's a big risk, because if you are kind of on the fence of if you got enough energy or not, and then you're migrating and you're having to avoid predation, or you get hit by a ship, you suddenly have a lot more cost associated with being a whale and migrating that you might not have been able to accumulate enough energy to offset. So it's a very expensive, very difficult life history strategy. Okay, great. So these are these key kind of whale watch areas that someone asked me about earlier. So the kind of main ones that everyone knows about are Depot Bay, Port Orford, Cape Blanco, and Yaquina Head. That being said, this whale watch, Oregon Whale Watch Week takes place at all these locations here on the right. So even though these might not be like the best spot to see gray whales, it's important that all of these spots are maintained so that you can get, for instance, like different sighting rates at the different locations. So like if Yaquina Head sees 50 whales at 3 o'clock, but like 2 hours earlier, a more northern site only saw 10, you're like, whoa, there's a lot of whales being missed in between there. So whether whales are spotted or not, it's all very important data for us to understand kind of how likely it is for us to accurately count whales that are migrating along Oregon. Again, Oregon plays this really important role in the PCFG whale foraging because they don't migrate. They forage both benthically and pelagically near shore in these Oregon environments. So even though we're not technically a feeding ground for the EMP gray whales, we are a feeding ground for the PCFG whales. So even though there's only 200, there's obviously some kind of complicated population dynamics where individuals will leave, some will join. They can't all just be mating with each other because that would lead to inbreeding. So there is some kind of genetic flow between the EMPs and the PCFGs for these guys to have even stayed here in the first place. So they are a really important group, even though they are a smaller group. And I want to talk a little bit about the research that I do on gray whales and also the research that's done by the GEM Lab at Oregon State on gray whales. So one thing that we do is we use drones in order to study gray whales. Drones are great because they're non-invasive. So they've shown that whales don't have different behaviors when a drone is above them than they do when there's not one above them. So their eyes are on the side of their head. Like, I don't even think they can tell there's a drone above them, and they don't react when you do fly a drone over them. So it's great because it's their completely normal behavior. It's totally natural. We're not disturbing them. They don't even really know that we're there. So this is kind of a blurry photo, but this is the work I'm doing like yesterday, like right now, where we're taking these videos of gray whales, and you want to get a picture that's perfectly flat because you want to measure the relative length and width of the animal. So you need one where the tail is up at the surface, it's flat, and it's like you can see all the lines of the body. You put it into this program, and you're able to take the length, and then you literally drag, it's like a monkey could do it. You take these little red sliders and just slide them and put them by the whale and make sure it's lining the body. And that will export this ratio of length to width, which is ultimately a measure for body condition. So if you're, 5 feet long, it's like with humans, it's like if you're 5 feet long, but you're like way too skinny at a certain part of your body, like you're probably not very healthy. And it's the same with the whales. So we take this standardized metric at 50% of the total length, no matter what the animal is, it's always at that 50% point. And we can compare them across each other to see who's skinny, who's fat, who's healthy, who's starving. So you get these kind of health metric, body condition metrics. You can also see behavior. So the photo I showed a little bit ago with all those whales migrating together, they don't live in pods and they don't typically kind of work together, but when they're migrating, like they're all there anyway. And the more of them there are, the less likely they are to be predated on or hit by ships or whatever. So they kind of gang up sometimes when they're migrating. So it's really interesting to take the drones and be able to look at group dynamics, who's with who, how many like animals are there, what are they doing, try to see if they're trying to feed. Because they feed benthically, they kick up a bunch of dust and mud, so you can see from above when a gray whale's been trying to feed because it's just the gray whale and all this mud. So it's really easy to see, oh, he's trying to do something, but go ahead, next slide. Also, we want to collect prey and oceanographic data. So it's great to know what the whales are doing and how healthy they are, but it doesn't really tell us anything if we can't compare it and place it in the context of where these animals are. So one thing that we do, the ship I was on in August was doing this, where they were taking benthic surveys at these important whale foraging locations. So by understanding how many amphipods are there, how much of their key prey item is there, it would make sense why, if there's not a lot of amphipods, the whales are all going to be skinnier. So you really need this other data to put into context what's going on with these animals and why they still might all be dying or not being able to successfully reproduce. You also want oceanographic data, so like we take data on the sea ice in the Arctic. So it's kind of it's a tricky relationship, because when the ice is melted, the whales have more access to foraging grounds. But if the ice melts too soon or not enough ice forms, you actually don't get this relationship between like the sea surface and the pelagic part of the water column and the benthos. So when that ice forms and then it melts, it feeds the benthos. All that ice and all the junk like floats to the bottom, and it feeds the amphipods. And so if you don't get enough ice forming and the ice doesn't melt and then drop down all the food, all the bottom critters will die too. So it's complicated, because you want just enough ice but not too much ice, or they can't get to the feeding grounds, but not a low amount of ice, and then their amphipods aren't there. So it's this complicated relationship between all these parts of the ocean. We also, one more back. Sorry. Yeah, just one. Yeah, that one. So we also take skin samples. So taking a skin sample from a whale is you use a crossbow and you have an arrow on the end with a small hollow metal tube, and you just take a tiny microscopic piece of skin and blubber from the animal. They don't really mind it. I don't think they notice, honestly, most of the time, because it's such a small sample. But that little tiny piece of skin and blubber tells us so much about the animal. It tells us how much stress or cortisol the animal has. You can do other hormone tests on it. I use them to try to determine how much the animal is feeding pelagically and benthically. So if the whales are all starving, we think that they're going to try to forage a different way. They're going to try to feed on something else, because I'd rather eat krill than starve, because there's no amphipods. So I use the skin samples to try to see if they're feeding in the water column or if they're just starving themselves and dying, basically. How adaptable are they is what I'm interested in. Go ahead. And then these Pacific Coast Feeding Group whales, these organ-specific whales, the long-term project that the GEM Lab works on is called GRANITE. It's a really long acronym that I don't remember, sorry. They take all different kinds of data from these animals, and they do these surveys for months at a time, every day that they can, going out. One thing they do is collect fecal samples. So it's really exciting for marine biologists when whales poop, because they don't poop all the time. And so if they do poop, you really, really want to get the poop. And they only poop if they're eating. So they're not just going to poop when they're fasting. They don't really have anything to poop. But if they're eating actively, like the PCFGs are, then they poop a lot more frequently. I feel like I'm saying poop a lot. But from those fecal samples, you can tell, again, that those stress cortisol levels, those hormones, there's a lot that it can tell you about what the whale is doing and how it's doing. They also use drones, similar to we do, to measure body condition over time. So because they've been studying these whales from a long time, they can put a drone up pretty easily, and you just need a flat photo of the whale and you know its body condition. So they're able to tell kind of how changes in body condition of the PCFGs have changed annually in response to different oceanographic conditions. So El Nino, La Nina, different upwelling years, as everything changes, so do the whale's body condition. And this whale on the right, I think, is pregnant because it's humongous. They're not supposed to be that wide. But that's another thing you can tell is what life stage is this animal? Are they skinny? Are they a calf? Are they pregnant? Are they a juvenile? All that kind of stuff you can tell from this drone footage. And then again, those changes in response to their different habitats. So as things change on the Oregon coast in their habitat they're in all the time, and as things change in response to different amounts of prey, different quality of prey, you can tell how that causes the whales to change as well. And then someone asked about noise. They also study noise levels off the Oregon coast. And so they put these microphones out in the water to try to determine what is the relationship between the PCFG's movement, their foraging, all sorts of stuff, to areas with different noise levels off of Oregon. Go ahead. Okay, I'm gonna see if this works. It's a really cool video. It's like a minute long, just showing the different behaviors that, try just clicking it. Okay, great. So this is the 5 coolest gray whale behaviors that have been captured by the GEM Lab with their drone footage. There is music, but it's just this little song. So jaw snapping, so you can see here the whale opening and closing its mouth on its side, doing that kind of silly. And then the drooling mud, so you can see this whale has mud in its mouth, and it's swimming, it's trying to get the mud out and just making these massive plumes that are pretty, indistinguishable. Headstands, that's just the tail. He's just upside down. There he's turning back on himself. Nursing, so you can see the calf. There it is. So you can see it was just under the mom. There it goes back down. And then poop. Number 1 is poop. Again, that's very exciting if you see that from a drone. So yeah, they're using these kind of, poop. Sample collection. Look how excited they are to get the poop. Super exciting stuff. So they, again, are trying to link those individual behaviors to health. See if you can go to the next slide. I'm going to try to click off the video maybe. Maybe try pause it. Oh, perfect. Okay. We'll just go through these really quick. So the work that we do with the EMPs is similar, but also very different. So this is a photo of me catching a drone in Mexico. I'm wearing like a WWE weightlifter belt, and I've got 2 carabiners tying me into the front of the boat. It's kind of overkill. Like, it'd be really hard to fall off the boat. But the drone is pretty big, and so you have to catch with 2 hands, and you have to wear protective face gear and protective gloves. And yeah, catching it's not scary. Letting it go is scary because it just flies out of your hands. But we measure, again, that those changes in body condition over time. So the first chapter of my dissertation is taking like 3 decades of gray whale body condition data and looking at how it changes in the different phases of migration. So like northbound, they're really, really skinny, and southbound, they should be way fatter. And then looking at how that changes also in these different life stages. So like calves are really fat when they go north because they've got all that awesome like mom milk. And then when they're coming back south, they're skinnier because they've had to be working with mom to forage, and they're not getting provisioned as they once were. Whereas like pregnant or lactating females have terrible body condition going north because the baby has like sucked them dry. And then when they're coming back south, it's a bit higher because they've been able to forage. So looking at this really fine scale change in different kind of like spatial and temporal scales. And then we also look how their condition is changing in response to that prey data. So we have, prey data from like the 70s until now, and then also from ice data. So those have been shown to be really powerful predictors of gray whale body condition. And then also, again, like I said, with those skin samples, how does their foraging behavior change in response to the different prey conditions? So I think that they're smart and adaptable. These animals have survived the ice age, so they've been through a lot, and I think they're quite smart. And so I think that when the benthic prey conditions are poor, they're gonna pivot and they're gonna try to feed in the pelagic part of the water column. But we will see. That's part of my dissertation research. And then another part of my research is to predict suitable foraging habitat in the Arctic. So we have GPS points from where whales have been seen in the Arctic, and you can basically pair that with environmental data to make a map of what is suitable foraging habitat for them. So that's part of one of my chapters, is trying to build that kind of model. And just to finish up, okay, I'm right on time. I just want to talk a little bit about conservation of these animals. Also, I think it got lost in my slides somewhere, but just a fun fact I really want to say. Gray whale milk is 53% fat, and human milk is 2% fat. So that gives you an idea of like why it's so expensive to lactate and to feed a baby calf, is because this milk is really thick and it's so full of fat. So they are just trying to like pump out all their energy into the babies. I really wanted to say that because that fact is crazy. So once again, they were nearly hunted to extinction in whaling. They were actually called the devilfish because they fought so hard when they were harpooned. So they're tough whales, and they are smart. And for instance, the other whale that I study, the southern right whale, is called the right whale because it was the right whale to kill because they were so friendly and gullible. Yeah, so very different. The devilfish, the gray whale, they were not going down without a fight. And so they had this amazing recovery after they got basically wiped to extinction, where their numbers came back, in spades. And yeah, you got to respect that, they really fought to have their numbers come back. Despite that, they're going through these unusual mortality events where a bunch of them are dying, and we think we know why, but it's very hard to try to do any kind of like management or conservation effort to address that when it's amorphous and we can't go and put more amphipods in the Arctic. So currently, this is the lowest number of whales since the 1970s. There's about 13,000 animals. With the government shutdown and with funding cuts to NOAA, it's made these like long-term monitoring programs really struggle. So I think in the next few years, we're going to have a little bit of a data gap in what's happening currently, which is a shame because we are still currently in the UME. Go ahead, next slide. So again, really important for that long-term monitoring. These Arctic surveys, the prey surveys, have been happening for decades, and they have these known gray whale hotspots where we go every year and collect the benthic data. It's very important because if we can't get the whale data, the benthic data can almost tell us as much because we know the relationship between the number of whales, the number of calves, and the amount and quality of prey in the Arctic. Again, it's also really important to get these abundance data. So that's what's like Whale Watch Week is great for, is because with the number of sightings, we have models that estimate the true abundance of the whales. So just the number of sightings is really important. If you see whales, you can submit your sighting to Happy Whale. If you see a whale stranded on the beach, please report that. Mortalities and stranding data are very important. Pretty much anywhere on the West Coast, there's going to be a stranding network. So if you ever see a whale on the beach, you can Google it and report it to the nearest stranding network. Next slide. Ultimately, my whole interest in my PhD is to try to understand how resilient gray whales are to climate change. So can they adapt? Can they, change their food source so they don't starve to death? Are their numbers going to even out eventually? Are they going to come out of the UME? How do they respond to changing prey conditions? How do they respond to ice? I feel like the questions are endless, but ultimately I just want to know and help managers, like natural resource managers, state agencies, NOAA, be able to predict how gray whales might do so that they can make management actions, like maybe creating more MPAs or maybe creating an Arctic MPA or something that can ultimately have consequences for gray whale conservation. I might be on my last slide. Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Yes. As the Arctic ice melts, have you noticed, has that been a positive or a negative change in the prey data up in the Arctic?
Yeah, as I mentioned, that's a super complicated relationship because it's kind of both. So when there's less ice, the whales have more access to different places to feed. But when there's less ice, the benthos is not fed the way that it is when there's a lot of sea ice and it all melts. It sends so much food down to the benthic organisms. So you have this decoupling between the pelagic and the benthic, where if there's not enough sea ice, like there's this gap between them and they don't have the nutrient like mixing that they do. So it's really tricky. I think long term it's bad for the whales. Short term it's good because they might be able to get in and get access to more areas as long as there's food there. But long term, ice melting, I think, for everything is bad. Yeah, thank you for your question.
Hi, this is Ken. Are the local non-migratory whales maintaining their population better than the migratory whales? And just how much problem are the barnacles for the whales?
Yeah, the whales don't notice the barnacles. I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen whales breach. So like humpback whales specifically are very breachy, which is where they fully propel themselves out of the water and then crash back down onto the surface. Part of that is believed to be them kind of trying to clean their skin off. So with that big splash they make on the surface, they can kind of get some barnacles off or get some of the whale lice off, or they'll get like little remoras on them and stuff, and like, you know, all sorts of stuff. So part of that behavior is believed to be to try to kind of clean themselves, because otherwise how would they? The barnacles are not that much of an issue. Cookie cutter sharks and stuff are probably more painful for them. As to your first question about the PCFGs, they're a much, much smaller group. So it's hard to measure like how well they're doing when there's only 200 of them compared to 13,000 EMPs. It's easier to see changes on that scale than it is with the PCFGs. And I don't know, I couldn't say for sure how the PCFGs are doing. I think they're relatively stable, but I'm not entirely sure. Yeah, thank you for your question.
This is Eunice. First, a comment. Just before COVID, we did have a program on the otters at the coast, and we were led to believe that the program was successful, but apparently it wasn't. But that's not my question. My question is, are you familiar with Oregon's most famous whale who lived
Exploded?
at Newport?
Oh, yeah.
Keiko?
Yeah, Keiko, yeah, right.
And then was shipped to Iceland and actually didn't survive there.
Yeah, I have heard about that. I thought you were going to say the whale that exploded. Yeah, I have heard about Keiko. Someone else was talking to me about that. It's tough with animals in captivity. I really morally struggle with animals in captivity because they're very important ambassador species. Like everyone who's been to the zoo feels connected to an animal there because they've seen it in a zoo. You know what I mean? So they're really important ambassadors, really important for conservation. That being said, whales probably should not be kept in captivity. They're all very smart, and I think it's not very nice to keep them in captivity. For an animal like that, some animals, when they're released from captivity, actually are fine. There's one whale, there's a beluga whale named Vlad, who was like a Russian spy whale. I swear I'm not making this up, and got released somehow and is very tame and will like fetch things for people. And he's like famous. If you Google Vlad the spy whale, he will come up. But like that's, for instance, an animal that probably was captive somehow because of the way that it interacts with humans, but is fine now. But yeah, that animal, Keiko, right?
He was there for medical reasons.
Right.
Well, and they needed some.
Right. Yeah, I think it's hard. I think they become dependent on humans, and I think some of them don't know how to forage, unfortunately. But yeah.
Yeah, my name's David, and with the proliferation of drones, I imagine that there's a lot of those pictures of the whales from the top, and I'm wondering if anyone is doing a project of using AI to identify the various whales.
You mean like individuals?
The individuals.
Yeah, for sure. It should be automated because photo ID takes a very, very long time to do by hand. In the work that I was doing, that I was showing you with just the little sliders, like I sometimes will be measuring the same whale and not even realize it, and then have to zoom way in on the fluke and be like, I think that dot matches. Like, it's not a great system. And AI would be great at differentiating probably between them. With an AI model, you have to like train the model and then it will run on a different set of data. And so I don't know why people haven't done it. I feel like it's just time consuming, if anything, but I know a lot of people that still do it by hand, which is a huge time commitment. But someone should do it. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Hi, I'm Mika. I'm wondering about the Canadians might be better funded right now, and are they doing the same kind of work?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. I don't have any Canadian collaborators, which is a shame. Now you're making me want to Google stuff, because I'm like, I know there's people there on the coast that are definitely looking at the gray whales. I do have research colleagues in Alaska. I'm in the North Slope Borough that have sent me gray whale samples from like subsistence kills or stranded animals or live whales. And I think that's a nonprofit, so maybe that's a little bit better funded. But yeah, Canada's a great idea. I'll definitely look into that, because I bet you they have better situation than we do right now. Thanks for your question.
Hi, my name is Franca. My question is about they're aquatic mammal, we're earth mammals, and I know that mammals can stop menstruating, stop their cycle human mammals, if they've had some kind of horrible grief, or like women in concentration camps or incarcerated. So are those aquatic mammals subject to the same stresses and stop the menses?
Yeah, I believe it's called senescence, I think, is when you stop menstruating. Yeah. So whales sometimes will, marine mammals are so cool. Sometimes, like if an animal's pregnant and it knows it's either going to die because it can't sustain its pregnancy or its young will die, it will self-abort. So it can just like remove the fetus itself because it knows that it will die or its fetus will die. Whales have one really long gestation, so they can gestate for like, no one knows entirely for sure, but like 15 plus months sometimes, like really, really long time to be pregnant. And they will also go through really long periods of not reproducing. So they often have what's called an interbirth interval of 2 to 3 years. So they'll have a baby and then they'll wait 2 to 3 years to try to reproduce again. I don't know that anyone has proven for sure that there is a point where a whale will like go through menopause and not be able to produce an egg or whatever it may be, because we're not even really sure how long whales live. So there's so much that's unknown. That being said, Wisdom, the Laysan albatross, is like a very famous bird. She's 80 something. She had an egg like last year. So seabirds, I'll come back and talk about seabirds too, because I love seabirds. It doesn't seem to be a thing in seabirds, which is fascinating, because 80 as a bird laying an egg, like that's crazy. She's had generations and generations and generations of young. So I also wouldn't be surprised if marine mammals could keep going for a long time the way that Wisdom does. Yeah, thanks for your question.
Hi, I'm Mark, and you called those the East Coast, and I had a friend, Jack Diamond, who's an oceanographer, and he always said land dwellers get that wrong.
Yeah.
It's not the West Coast, it's the East Coast of the
for
Pacific
them it is.
Ocean.
Yeah, right.
And but anyway, what kind of mathematics do they use to accumulate all of those individual counts along the coast and to do regression or some kind, because you have 9 people counting at one place, counting the same whale as the guy next to him and reporting it out, and you have that at 9 locations down the beach.
Yeah.
How error strewn is that data?
Yeah, I'm not sure where exactly or how exactly the abundance estimates from Whale Watch Week are used. That being said, within these population models, there are a lot of things that account for things like that. So like they have an error for detection probability. So like how likely are you to even see the whale in the first place? How likely is it that the whale will be recounted? They have all of these kind of mathematics that they like use in these models, and they do the same thing with terrestrial animals. So like terrestrial animals often go through a process called mark recapture, which is where you catch an animal, you let's say you band it, and then if you see it again next year, like say you banned 5 animals and the next year you see 3, you can from that you like calculate a detection probability. So like we didn't detect 2 of these animals, and so maybe they died or maybe they emigrated or something like that. So there's a lot of like really complicated math that goes into it that I'm not smart enough to write, but someone else is, and so they've definitely taken all that into account.
Hi. The gray whales, you say, are bottom feeders.
Mm-hmm.
So I presume, so this question relates both to the gray whales, but other kinds of whales as well.
Mm-hmm.
The gray whales, I'm going to presume, feed or live only in fairly shallow waters, at least the continental shelf, but they don't go further out. So number one, that's true?
Yes. So they forage in the Arctic, where it's like whenever I build like a map of the bathymetry, it looks like I didn't even use bathymetry because it's all one depth. It's really shallow and consistent. So it's these big basins where it's like 50 meters, 50 feet maybe. It's very shallow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what about other whales? I mean, will you find other whales, other kind of whales, other species out in the deeper ocean?
Definitely.
Off the continental shelf?
Definitely, yeah. So sperm whales, for instance, like they only fight giant squid. So they're going like 1,500 meters into the water at 3,000 feet down to fight these giant squid in the dark. I mean, I would sell my organs to see this, because how cool would that be to watch a sperm whale and a giant squid duke it out? So there are a lot of animals, marine animals, that are specially designed to go really deep, like the penguins. I'm not trying to take it back to birds, but the penguins can dive, like 550 meters. So the penguins are going 1,500 feet. So these animals are like specifically designed to be diving marine predators. Gray whales, they could go deep if they wanted. It's like they could go deep. They're physiologically equipped to eat other food. So they're not like they can only eat amphipods and their body literally won't let them like process anything else. They're fully equipped to eat other food. They're fully equipped to go deeper. They've just kind of found this feeding niche that they potentially haven't quite gotten out of yet. So yeah, they can go deeper.
Hi, I'm Virginia. And following up on that same kind of question, I guess, is we talk about the pollution in the ocean, and there's the North Pacific gyre. Do whales, either the grays or the blues perhaps, get involved in that? Is that a problem, other than it's this big space where there's all this crap
floating around in the ocean? Yeah, that's the garbage pile, right?
Yeah.
The North Pacific gyre. Yeah, I think that's where the garbage patch is. It's crazy we even have a garbage patch in the ocean. You would hope not. I think like the only way you can really like tell where whales are is by putting a satellite tracker on them, which either are really deeply implanted and not great for the animal, or short-lived and don't last as long. And then you'll get GPS points as to where the animal is. You can also just see them. So I'm not sure if anyone does surveys around the garbage patch. They probably should, to see if there's animals that are using those areas, but I would hope that the animals would move. Yeah, I don't know for sure, but I hope not.
Thank you. Last question. You may have noticed, of course, we're a senior citizen audience. So a natural question is, what could we learn from an aging whale world that could apply and benefit us older folks?
Lessons from the whales? Oh, I don't know. That's tricky. Again, like I hope and I believe that the gray whales are adaptable. So I think as like even me, you know, like having gone through the pandemic and having been stranded abroad and moved to a bunch of different states and stuff, I think the lesson we all can learn is to stay adaptable and to stay flexible and to roll with the punches, because they are coming quick nowadays and it's a tough time. And I hope that the whales can adjust, and I hope that, like, you know, they can take it as it comes and do the best with what they have. And I feel like that's the lesson we all could take from the whales. Yeah. Thank you, guys.